Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Kay Witherow, and I'm the events assistant here at Parnassus Books. Today, we are so excited to present international best-selling author Maggie O'Farrell for the paperback release of her book, Hamnet. Just as a reminder, you can purchase a copy of Hamnet from Parnassus Books, and purchasing the book is the best way to support future author events like this. Maggie is taking questions during this event from the audience. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the Facebook comments for a chance of having them answered during the presentation. Maggie is joined today by someone who needs no introduction to Parnassus friends, author and co-owner Ann Patchett. I am so pleased to turn it over now to Maggie and Ann.
Thanks, Kay, and hi, Maggie. I'm gonna rename myself because I have my secret identity name up on the screen. Hang on, and people are going to be thinking, Ann Van Devender is interviewing Maggie O'Farrell. What's up with that? Click there. Hey, I'm two people. Do you have two names?
No, I don't. Well, actually, I have one secret name which I use for things like when I'm emailing the school about my son being late. But nobody knows who I am. So I have one, but I don't have a name. I just have my name. But Van Devender is a great name, really nicely. But obviously, Ann Patchett is the best name.
Yeah, Van Devender takes about 2 weeks to say, so I try to just stick with the Patchett. I am so excited to see you on Zoom. We did one event together, Australia, New Zealand, didn't we? We were on something, and your father-in-law was sick, and you had to duck out. What am I remembering? This is very sad, folks. Maggie O'Farrell keeps freezing.
My phone, it was quite a big, there were quite a few of us. I remember that. So yeah, I met you on Zoom, but I was actually in the room when you won the Orange Prize. I was right there. And you seem to have all your family up on a balcony.
Wow.
And there was this incredible, when your name was announced, and there was this enormous kind of whoop of all these Patchetts up on the balcony. It was so brilliant, and there was this kind of big sort of waterfall of applause from it. It was wonderful.
My very elderly, now dead English cousins were with us, and one, Father Bernard, a Catholic priest, and his sister, and they had been staying in a convent. And they said that they got the nuns to pray for me all night that I would win. So I came in, with a strong advantage.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad those nuns were on the right side. They're on the side of the good. No, it was very exciting. It was a really exciting party. I loved it. I think it was the first time I'd ever been to it was the Orange Prize.
It was the Orange Prize. Did you have a good time when you went this last time?
Well, let's just say it was me and my computer on the Zoom call, because of course it was whenever it was, May, June. So yeah, the revels weren't exactly, sort of Jack Kerouac style. It was very muted. So it was just me and my husband, and I said, "Oh, I won!" And we said, "Yay!" And all we had in the fridge was a kind of flat bottle of sparkling water. So we cracked that open, but it wasn't exactly, it wasn't exactly kind of high times. But it was still obviously, as you know yourself, it's a really nice, wonderful thing to have.
So you have the little statue?
I've got my Bessie. Yes.
Your Bessie?
Where's yours? Where do you keep your Bessie?
I've got mine in the living room. So we should just say to the folks at home that when you win this prize, that was the Orange Prize, then the Bailey's Prize, now the Women's Prize, because the funding keeps changing, the thing that is consistent is that you get this very weird yet sweet little statue, and they cast one out of bronze every year for the winner. And it becomes this strange club. Tiari Jones and I did some Zoom event together, and we both had our Bessies with us while we were doing it. So, yeah, it's a, you know, it's a nice sorority.
Yeah, it is actually. It's exactly what it is. Yeah, she's on the shelf in my study, and my youngest daughter, who's 8, often gives her a friend. So sometimes I go in there, and she's hanging out with a kind of dinosaur. A few times I've been in, and she's hanging out with this griffin and then a unicorn. So she, you know, she has a great social life here, I have to say, with a weird sort of roster of mythological creatures.
I'm really glad the pandemic has not been hard for Bessie. Okay, so this is my first question these days. How has your pandemic been?
Well, you know, I mean, God, it's been a long year, hasn't it? I can't quite believe, you know, here we are again, and we're still, you know, I think we were supposed to come out of lockdown this week, but now we've got this new Indian variant, which is in Glasgow, which is not, you know, about 30 miles from where we are. So we're kind of holding our breath. But it's been, I mean, I don't know, we've been very lucky because all 5 of us have been well. And my parents have been well, and we've got a garden, which you can see some of out the window. I don't know how anybody has managed to homeschool without an outdoor space. You know, I think anybody who's, you know, I mean, I've got friends of mine who live on the 4th or 5th floors of, which is about the highest flats, you know, apartment blocks go in Edinburgh. I know in America it's a whole other ball game, but so it's been long, and I don't know, it's what a strange year. I mean, it's very peculiar, but I think we have been very lucky, and I'm now fully vaccinated, which is a very good feeling.
Congratulations.
How about you? How's your lockdown?
You know, I'm fully vaccinated, very lucky. We didn't lay anybody off at the store. We were closed for a long time, and then we opened in a small way, and then we opened in a bigger way. But, you know, nobody got sick, and that was all really good. It was a very productive time for me, weirdly. So I'm always just so interested in what other writers are doing, because I think for some people, they couldn't read and they couldn't write. And for other people, it was just the opposite. So that's what I'm asking.
I did read. I found myself rereading a lot, actually. I found that I wanted to return to books that I'd loved before, to reread them again. I also found myself rereading a lot of series, which I thought was interesting. It's as if I really craved the kind of long form of 3 or 4 novels in a sequence. So I reread the Casalettes, and I reread the Old Filth trilogy and the Barrytown trilogy, and you know, so I felt like I really wanted to go back to things that I'd loved. It was a kind of craving for, I don't know, something, I don't know what it was, but that was quite interesting. But I have been writing. I think the hardest thing I found in terms of writing in the pandemic was just headspace and time, because I've got 3 kids, and of course they were all off school. So, you know, I mean, obviously writers are really used to working from home, but I'm not really used to teaching homeschooling 3 children. So that was tricky, just finding the time and the headspace when the house is full. And, you know, even when my husband was with the kids, I had people coming in every 5 minutes saying, I've lost my pencil case, I need a jam jar, I need my exercise book. So actually the one thing I did, there was one day last summer when I was so desperate to concentrate that I went and hid in
Okay, now you're frozen, and I really, really want to know where you hid.
Wendy house, which is tiny. So I was kind of crunchy. Can you hear me now? I was hiding in my daughter's Wendy house.
Oh.
So it's a tiny kind of playhouse, and I hid in there with I'm the only people that found me were the cats, but I had 2 hours of uninterrupted time. So that's what I would recommend for anybody. Just find a really good hiding place.
Right.
Just, you know, it wasn't great for me sort of chiropractically, but in terms of concentration, it was great.
I was at the bookstore this morning and sold somebody those Jane Gardam Old Filth novels, which I love more than anything.
Gee, that's interesting. I only read them quite recently, about 2 years ago, and there is that there's nothing like the feeling when you read the first book, say in a trilogy, and you just love it, and it's this joyous feeling where you think, oh my God, I've got 2 more. But they are extraordinary. They're so quietly experimental and the idea that you get these shifting viewpoints and these three characters who circle each other, they're just absolute works of genius. I have been pressing them. They're the books that I buy most often as presents for people. So I do force them down the throats of all my friends. I love the fact that you love them too.
No, I absolutely agree, because they're the books that so many people haven't heard from, and they're just surefire winners. And actually, at one point, when I was writing Commonwealth, which structurally was really complicated for me, and I took Old Filth and I made a map of it to see, okay, we're 5 pages in this point of view in this year, and then we're 8 pages in this year in this point of view, just to see how she had put all of that together, which was really extraordinary.
And was your map very complicated? Because I suspect that the structure of that book, I haven't analysed it like you have, or not yet anyway, but I really complicated the structure of Old Filth. I mean, actually, the story was in the Chinese box structure of these novels.
It is really complicated. And it's interesting because Hamnet does actually a very similar thing structurally, of going back and forth in time. And sort of playing with the reader's tension, and you sort of give the reader a break when things get very painful. You drop back in time, or when things get too painful back in time, you move forward to a better time. Oh, Maggie, I hope you're not frozen for good.
I can hear you. I can hear you. I know. I'm so sorry. I don't know why the internet is being so dodgy tonight. But I think, I find structure really fascinating. And I often, when I read a book that I love, I will race through it for the first read, and I have to know what happens, and I'm galloping through it just to know what happens in terms of a plot. And then I always feel a bit like one of those sort of engine nerds who really wants to know how the engine of a car, I will open up the car bonnet of the book and think, how did she or he do this? How did they work it out? How does this engine run? I need to know the parts of it and how they all fit together. So I will do a kind of very slow, and like you, actually, I will draw a diagram. I like to think the structure as a kind of, in terms of a 3-dimensional shape. I suspect you do as well, actually. I don't know. When I've read your books, you often have, I can tell you have a strong adhesion to structure and the sort of dimensionality of a novel.
I definitely do. Do you plan? Because I have some vague idea about the structure, but with something like Hamnet, did you plan that structure? Or do you just write and get to a point in present that you think, okay, now I need to drop back?
Well, Hamlet's a bit different. In some ways, Hamlet's got the most straightforward structure and the most straightforward chronology of all my books, actually, because I don't really like chronology as a narrative force. I think it's a bit of a tyranny. I don't think it's how we think and how we're made out. I don't think it's how our memories work, and this very neat sort of sequential A to B, and we're going to move forward in time and we're not going to look back. I think our brains and our memories are much more geological. It's much more to do with bedrock, and layers are laid down, and something seismic will happen and the bedrock will burst out. I'm not sure, my geology is a bit shaky. I don't know if that's actually geologically true. We'll just go with it. But with Hamlet, Hamlet, the thing about Hamlet is, it is a novel based on real people. And, when I was writing the first half of the book, I was creating the life of this little boy who I always feel has been really overlooked by history and by scholarship. I feel like he's been consigned to a footnote. So my whole idea was I wanted to put him center stage to say, this child was important. His short life has been hugely significant. And as much as I wished that I could have let him live, I really wanted to let him live, but there is an entry in the parish register in Stratford-upon-Avon in 1596 proving that he died age 11, and I couldn't get around that, and that was the thing. I was desperate as a human being and as a mother for it not to be true, but it was true. So I couldn't avoid that. So in a sense, I don't normally plan, actually. Normally I have a vague idea like you of where the book will end up, but often it takes a right angle or a complete U-turn. But I quite like that. I always feel that's the point at which a book is starting to get its own pulse and its own heartbeat. And, so I feel like something's happening, the right stuff is happening. But, but there is, I always thought that Hamnet was going to be about fathers and sons and ghosts, actually, as of course the play Hamlet is. But I think in the writing of the book, what I realized is that actually not being able to see a ghost would be more painful, would be more difficult. And that's actually probably more the reality, that, you know, I wanted Hamlet's death to feel significant to the reader and also to the characters in the book. And I thought, actually, what would be more heartbreaking is not being able to see him, not having this communication with this lost child. So yeah, I suppose in that way, the book metamorphosed while I was writing it.
It's interesting too, you say, oh, you know, you wish that Hamnet didn't have to die. And yet what you get your wish in a weird way, because what you introduce us to is the idea that Judith is going to die. And then you do save a child, because I imagine that there's no historical indication that Judith was sick.
No, there's none at all. I mean, it's not known what the real Hamlet Shakespeare died of. You know, there's just an entry for his burial. There's no cause of death recorded at all. But I mean, Judith as a character intrigues me a lot, because she, you know, the life expectancy in rural Warwickshire in the 16th century was 47. So I would already be dead because I'm 48.
I'm long gone.
But
yeah.
Judith lived until her early 70s, which is extraordinary. Yeah, I would be an ancient old crone, you know. So Judith herself lived until her 70s, which is, you know, extraordinary. And I mean, Susanna, the older sister, she lived until her late 60s. But I just got the idea that Judith had lived this sort of almost a double length of life. It's as if she lived her own life and she lived Hamlet's as well. And of course, you don't have to go, you know, you don't have to delve very far into Shakespeare's work to see that there are an awful lot. You know, he has a recurring motif of boy and girl twins and this exchanging of places and being mistaken for each other. You know, you look at the play Twelfth Night, which is, we think anyway, the play that he wrote after Hamlet, which is about boy and girl twins who are separated and they both think the other one is dead. And then they are magically reunited, you know, towards the end of the play. And there's this whole kind of, it plays it for comedy, you know, they're all mistaken for each other and they fall in love with the wrong people and the wrong people fall in love with them. But so, you know, I think I just drew that from them, really. But then there's no historical evidence that Judith was sick. But the other thing that's heartbreaking about Judith is that she had 3 sons, one of whom died as an infant, and the other 2 died in their early 20s within a week of each other in high summer. So I was and her husband also died at the same time. So it's possible that they, as a child, which is, you know, I don't know, this is something I made up. It's possible that she would have survived it again. She could have nursed her sons and her husband until they died, you know, but she survived. So that was just a kind of a sort of I don't know, epidemiological imagining from me about how she survived for so long while burying all, you know, oh God, burying her twin brother, her babies, her sons, her husband. It's just, you know, I cannot imagine her life. It's just extraordinary.
But that is also echoed throughout the book, because it's a central death, the death of Hamnet. That's our story. But it is surrounded by death in every single direction. So Agnes, Hamnet's mother, it's so much about her death. What an extraordinary person she was. What an extraordinary mother. She dies so young, and then Agnes is left with Joan. She's not even a wicked stepmother, she's an idiot stepmother, which may be even worse. And then Shakespeare, the tutor, everybody in that household is mourning the death of the sister Anne. The Annes are always the first to go. You know, so no matter where anyone in this family looks, there has been a tragic loss.
But I think, you know, I mean, actually none of that I had to make up. I think that was just the reality of life then, unfortunately. You know, I think, you know, life expectancy was very short. And of course, particularly for women, you know, I mean, it's extraordinary when you look at you know, I was looking at various wills and the parish records and just the sheer number of pregnancies these women had. It's just
yeah, unbelievable. I'm going to just add through any moment that you're frozen.
12, 13, and then they had children and they. I'm so sorry, can you hear me now? So I think I think life and death were very much lived in the raw in those days. You can't even imagine what it would have been like. There was so much loss, and I think people would have, unfortunately, have just had to get, it was just a fact of life.
Two questions have just popped up, and they can be combined into one question, which is, what kind of research did you do for this book, and when did you first have the idea for this book? And that, in a way, seems like the same question.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I think I first had the idea of writing it as a novel. In fact, I was looking in my notebooks the other day for another reason, and I did see an entry. It was about 2014, which and it's a book I write all kinds of ideas and just lines, possible titles, anything. And I'd written a novel about William Shakespeare's son, Hamnet, and I had a question mark. And at a later date, I'd put square brackets around it in different ink. So I'd obviously thought this is an idea I should return to. But actually, I think in a way it goes back. I studied the play Hamlet for my Scottish Highers when I was 16, and it really got under my skin in a way that other Shakespeare plays hadn't. I just really loved Hamlet, and I loved the character, and I think he does appeal to a certain type of adolescent, a sort of slightly melancholic adolescent who wears a lot of black and maybe too much eyeliner, which I certainly was. And my teacher mentioned in passing one day that Shakespeare had a son who was called Hamnet, and he died about 4 years before Shakespeare went on to write the play Hamlet. And I was really struck by this idea of, the similarity of the names, because they are, as I discovered later, the same name. They're completely interchangeable in parish records of the time. And I just thought, well, what does it mean? What does it mean for Shakespeare to have called this play after his dead son, given them the same name? And when I went to university, I studied literature, and I was reading a lot more about Shakespeare. And I was really amazed that Hamnet doesn't really get any airtime at all in scholarship and academia and biographies, and nobody ever really thinks, or it seemed to think, it was at all significant. And also the idea that Shakespeare is a very, for all the enormous output we have of his work, he's a very mysterious character. He's quite shadowy. There's so much we don't know about him, and there's all these big gaps and longeurs in his story. No one's ever, despite the very meticulous efforts of the best scholars in the world, been able to work out how this some who was probably only educated at grammar school to the age of 15, how he managed to transition from that to the stage. No one's ever been able to work. Scholars are first years, but in a sense, I always feel that in the act of calling Hamlet us as a human being, we can suddenly see him as a grieving father, as a human being, as a man who is heartbroken. I think it's enormously significant. So I was always really shocked that nobody has given this little boy his due. I don't think without him we would have Hamlet, and I don't think we'd have Twelfth Night. So I wanted to write about him, to say, this is him. I want you all to meet him. He's so important. I wanted to give him a voice and a presence.
So what other research did you do? Because of course there's everything and there's nothing.
Yes, exactly. No, so I did. I mean, there was a lot of it. Well, obviously it was library based, because there's no shortage of books written about Shakespeare at all. You could spend the rest of your life reading about Shakespeare if you wanted to, and so there was also that. But there's some physical research as well. So if you go to Stratford-upon-Avon, despite the fact that we know so little about Shakespeare, we only have 6 examples of his signature, all of which are spelt differently. What's extraordinary about going to Stratford-upon-Avon is that you can buy a ticket. Yeah. So he often spelt it with an X, which some people think that maybe we should be pronouncing it Shakespeare. That's maybe how he pronounced it. But sometimes he spelt it with an A, with no E at the end, with no A. It's just all up for grabs. The spelling was very unstable in the 16th century. But so what's amazing, really, about Stratford, the town, is that you could, despite how little we know about Shakespeare and how he grew up, you can stand in the room where he ate his dinner. You can go up to the bedroom that he shared with his brothers. You can stand in the room where he was born. It does seem extraordinary. And I would say to anybody who is even remotely interested in literature or Shakespeare to please go, because it is a really magical experience, because it seems so unlikely that these houses have survived the intervening 400 years, and they're still there, as they were. So obviously I went around all the different houses, and I walked around them about 5 times, and I asked all the guards all the kind of guys about what you describe it as physical research. I wanted to actually kind of quite literally get my hands dirty. So for the character of Hamlet's mother, I learnt to fly a kestrel. I went down to the borders in Scotland, and I had to meet this falconer, and I learnt hawking. That was actually the most fun thing I've ever done in the name of research. And I planted my own Elizabethan medicinal garden. I'm not much of a gardener, but I did get the seeds, and because I wanted to understand the labour involved, because the lives, particularly of the women in those days, are very undocumented. You can find anything you want about Tudor palaces and Tudor kings and queens and basically rich people, but there's not an awful lot about the lives of rural people. There's a bit about men, but there's not an awful lot about women. So I also went on an archaeological dig along the River Thames in London, in Tudor dumps. So I dug in the river, just below where the original Globe Theatre was situated. And actually I found loads and loads of these Tudor brass pins, which are these brass-ended pins that they were used for, obviously, for their costumes, to keep their ruffs on and to keep their wigs on. And so I have a whole collection of those in a dish, which I kept. So it was good. It was very good fun. So the research was very varied. There was a lot of books, and there was a bit of getting my hands dirty in gardens and on the River Thames, and there was also going to see the houses.
Did you dig into the plays really hard? Did you make yourself a great student of the plays, or maybe you already were?
Well, no, I mean, I'd done some. I studied literature at university, but I did go back and read them all. Well, not all, actually, not all. some. I mean, obviously, I read Hamlet again several times, quite carefully, and I listened to some of the speeches with particular actors doing them. And I think, reading the play, when I was at university, we were encouraged completely to never to think about any kind of biographical resonances or references in the play. That was completely verboten, completely forbidden. We were supposed to look at it in a very theoretical way, this very kind of empirical attitude to it. So going back to it and reading it again through the lens of the lost child, I was really quite shocked, because there was so much about it. I'd slightly forgotten exactly, for example, that the ghost, of course, the dead king, is also called Hamlet. So it's as if the name has been split in two, and one of them is the prince who's alive, the young boy who's alive, and then the father who's dead. And it doesn't really take a psychiatrist to see what Shakespeare is doing there. I mean, the idea, it's funny, because I read in some biographies, there were some scholars who said, it's impossible to know whether or not Shakespeare was thinking about his son when he called the play Hamlet. I just wanted to kind of shake these books and say, are you serious? What?
Yeah.
Where, nowhere in the universe would a writer just kind of casually use the name of their son, who's probably been dead for about 4 years at this point. Nobody. The idea that you'd have to write that name again and again in a manuscript, or hear it again and again in rehearsals, or speak it yourself, because of course there is a story that Shakespeare himself took the role of the ghost in the early production of Hamlet at the Globe. The idea that you'd be speaking it, over and over again every night to this audience who had no idea what this name meant to you, the huge significance of it, it's just preposterous. Of course he was thinking about his son. So I was just fascinated by the idea that Shakespeare had done what actually any parent wishes to do when their child is suffering. I always find that my first and most visceral wish is that I could have it. You want to make this kind of bargain and say, let me have it. I'll have this cold, I'll have this fever, I'll have this rash, give it to me, and then spare the child. And that is, of course, I think anyway, what Shakespeare is doing with the play. It is, if you read it through the lens of the lost son, you can see that it's clearly a message from a father in one realm to an unreachable son in another realm. And it's just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to read it. The speech actually that I find almost impossible to read is the one where the ghost is describing the manner of his death. Because of course, he's just telling his son Hamlet that he was asleep in the orchard, and his brother comes along pours poison into his ear. And he describes the agony of his death. He talks about the poison coursing through the gateways and alleys of his body. And he says, horrible, horrible, most horrible. It was just the most agonizing death. And I don't know, I just really hope that Shakespeare made that up, that it was completely from his imagination. But I have a horrible feeling that actually he's describing Hamlet's death. He's describing watching his son die. And it just sounded to me like the plague, the poison coursing through the body in the gateways and alleys. And it's awful. I find it, I almost can't read that speech now.
It's interesting. I was going through the book yesterday, and how, especially at the opening, how often you begin a paragraph, Hamnet, Hamnet, Hamnet. It would be an interesting book to listen to, because the repetition of his name and just that sound again and again, how you establish him at the center, is very moving in a way that seems very much like what you're talking about in terms of the play.
Well, I think I was just always surprised that not many people had heard of him. I mean, I was really lucky because I had this brilliant English teacher at high school, and he told me, I can't really remember a time when I didn't know the play and the idea of this lost boy. But, most of the people that I was at university with on my course had never heard about him. When I was thinking of writing a book, I told a couple, and I don't often discuss books that I haven't written, but I would tell people about it. And several people said to me, you can't make that up. You can't make up that Shakespeare had a son called Hamnet. And I said, I haven't made it up. I promise you it's really true. You can see it. It's in the records. It's fact. So I think I was just amazed. And I think I was so, I don't know about you, but I often feel that sometimes books start from a sort of, you kind of want to say, I really want to tell you people about this. This is really important. I want to tell you, and I don't understand why this isn't understood. I don't understand it. I want other people to try and understand it. So that was certainly my feeling with this. I wanted people to know about Hamlet, to say he was important. This boy's life was short but significant.
Okay, I'm going to ask you this question, but then hang on to what you just said, because I want to come back. Someone just popped up and said, have you read James Joyce's interpretation of Hamlet?
Yes, in Ulysses. Yeah, so Hamnet and Hamlet get a brief mention, very brief actually, mention in Ulysses, which is, I don't know how many other references there are to him in literature, but that's one of the few, I think. But it is, that's brilliant in itself, because of course, Ulysses is about the father who no longer has a son and the son who no longer has a father or a parent. There is this kind of echo in Ulysses of,
right.
Not only Homer, but also Shakespeare as well. So it's brilliant. Obviously, it's not exactly news, headline news. Yeah, I think Ulysses is really good. Sure.
You're not only setting Hamnet's story to light, but also Agnes's story and the much maligned Anne Hathaway, and you're giving her a much better shake. So,
yeah, well, that was one of the things.
Half of it.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were saying a minute ago about how, books often take off on their own direction. You can start off with plan A and then you end up with plan C or D by the end. So I didn't really plan actually for Hamnet's mother to be such a significant character. But what happened was that in the course of my research, I became, again, it kind of goes back to outrage. I became absolutely furious by the way that she's been treated and the way that she's been represented for, 400 odd years. It just seems to me, I don't know how she's viewed in the States, but certainly in this country, we've been always fed one single narrative. And that is that she was this older peasant woman illiterate peasant, stupid woman who lured this boy genius into marriage, that he regretted ever marrying her, that he had to run away from London to get away from her, that he hated her. These are all things that I have read in very respected works of scholarship and biography. I've read a very well-known biographer saying, she was ugly and that she was stupid, And, there's not even a single shred of evidence for any of this. It's all total fabrication. So little is known about him. If you think we know little about Shakespeare, we know even less about the woman that he was married to. And yes, she was 26 to his 18 when they got married, and she was probably around 3 months pregnant because their eldest daughter Susanna was born 6 months later. But you know, the last time I looked, it does take two people for a woman to get pregnant, not just one.
Right.
I think I'm right and fairly right in saying that. And also, you know, there's one, just for an example, there's one portrait of her in existence. It's a pencil sketch, and in it, she's very beautiful. She's got this very narrow face with high cheekbones, and she's got more than a passing resemblance to the actress Saoirse Ronan, who I think most people can agree is pretty far from being ugly. You know, and just, you know, I mean, people will always bring up the famous second best bed behest in Shakespeare's will. So this proves that he hated her. You know, yes, the second best bed behest he isn't showing any affection for his wife, but actually he doesn't show any affection for anybody. I mean, you would never think that it's written by the same person who wrote probably the greatest lines ever about love. I mean, he was dying, you know, let's not be unfair to the man. Right. I think we must do our best writing. But also what her detractors never ever mention is that in Jacobean law, when Shakespeare died, Anne, his widow, Agnes, was entitled to a third of his estate, and she was entitled to stay on in the mansion of a house that he had bought her to the end of her life. So the idea that she's this discarded wife chucked out on a curb with just a bed to her name is preposterous, absolutely preposterous. And what's always been more significant to me about their marriage is that at the end of his career, when he retired from the stage, he was the equivalent of a multimillionaire. He was incredibly wealthy and successful at this point, but he could have lived anywhere he wanted in the whole world, but he chose to go back to Stratford-upon-Avon to live out the final years of his life with her, which doesn't speak to me of a man who regrets his marriage. And every single penny he earned on the stage, he sent back to Stratford-upon-Avon. So he lived right into the end of his career. He lived in a single room, very modest lodgings in London. But in Stratford, he bought a huge mansion a year after Hamnet was born for his wife and his daughters. He bought cottages, he bought fields, he leased things out. So he was a very well-known landlord in Stratford. And again, that doesn't speak to me of somebody who ran away from Stratford to get away from his family. So I was just so, as you can tell, actually, I was really enraged about how she's treated. And I couldn't understand why, you know, biographers and scholars and other novelists and writers of Oscar-winning screenplays have been so desperate to give Shakespeare a retrospective divorce. You know, are we just so committed to the idea that our male artists need to be footloose and fancy-free? And what is so offensive about the idea that he loved her, that their marriage was a partnership? So I wanted to ask readers to forget everything they think they know about her and open themselves up to a new interpretation that perhaps their marriage was a love marriage, that they did love each other right to the end of their lives. And one of the things that really shocked me was that when I read her father's will, so her father, Richard Hathaway, was a very successful sheep farmer, and he died a year before she married William. And in his will, he left her a very generous dowry, and he referred to her as my daughter Agnes. And that was like this kind of lightning bolt moment, because I thought, you know, on top of everything else, it looks as though we've been calling her by the wrong name for 400 years. And again, you know, just as we were saying, you know, the spelling in those days was very unstable, and Agnes was probably pronounced nearer to the French, like Agnes or Annis. So you can see why somebody might have transcribed it as Anne at another point further down the line. But so it felt like a kind of gift in a sense to a novelist. So I thought, well, I'm gonna give this name back to her, because surely if anyone knows her real name, it would be her father.
Of course. And speaking of that family, I love the character of Bartholomew. So well done. Every time he comes on the page, I just love him. And he seems to operate as this counterbalance to Shakespeare. He is this very different kind of very kind man. So that loved him. I have so many things that I want to ask you, just sort of personally, but how is it being married to a writer? Because this is so much about partnership marriage, right? It's a loving partnership marriage, and I'm looking at all of these things in your life, and I want to talk about I am. But yeah, how is the whole two writers in a house?
But you know, it's funny. We're so used to it; it doesn't really seem like any big deal to us at all. And actually, I've known Will, my husband, since I was 18. We weren't actually together for another 10 years, but I met him when I was 18 and he was 19. I said to my son is almost 18, and I said to him, I was about your age when I first met your dad. And he's this kind of look of shock and horror on his face. So I suppose, I mean, we kind of knew each other before we were writers in a sense, so I think, and actually I'm sure it's just so prosaic, because it's just like any couple who are in the same job or the same line of work, that there's a lot less to explain in a sense. If I go into his study and he says, I can't talk to you now, go away. I don't I just think, oh, fair enough, that's fine. And so I back out. So I suppose it just feels so ordinary to us. It's not even really a big deal. And also we write very different books, and he's always the first person who read anything I write, which is, it's brilliant. And I'm sure, I don't know if I'm sure you have trusted friends or readers, the people who, not kind of necessarily professional relationships, but it has to be a very specific kind of friendship or relationship. You need someone who's going to be very honest with you, but also isn't going to pull their punches in a way, because you don't necessarily want somebody who's going to say, oh, it's lovely, it's all lovely. You need someone who's going to say, this bit's terrible, this bit's rubbish, what were you thinking, that bit's all right. But there's kind of you need
Right.
someone who's going to be quite harsh with you. So I have on my desk, one of my things next near where Bessie is, I have a plaster cast of my husband's teeth. So he got one of those sport thingies, what do you call them, I don't know, gum shields.
Yeah.
He's 40, unlike me, made, and he was going to throw out this plaster cast of his teeth, and I said, can I have it? And so when I'm writing, and sometimes I kind of feel I'm in the flow, and I think, oh, this is a really nice metaphor. Sometimes I look at the teeth and I think, I better cut it.
It's really funny when you've got a trusted reader and you've worked together for a long time. I do this all the time. I think, oh, Miley would make me take that out. Mm-hmm. That little clause, that second adjective, she would strike that out. I'm just going to go ahead and save her the trouble and take it out.
There you go. You see, it's exactly the same. Yeah. It's funny because people often say, I don't know, people ever ask you, they say, who are you writing for? And I always think, the idea that you're writing with this sort of imaginary reader over your shoulder is so disturbing. I would never do that. But actually, I just write for my mates, really. The 3 or 4 people that my close friends or my husband, I just write and I think, oh, they're going to like that bit, or they won't like that bit, or just, yeah, exactly as you're saying.
Yeah, but see, I would say I edit for those people, but I don't write for those people. I write for myself, but I edit for those other people. I want to talk for a second about I Am, which is your memoir, which I loved so much. And yesterday I listened to your Fresh Air interview with Terry Gross, which was weird, as Fresh Air interviews so often are. But she talked about and of course I had read this in the book, but I was thinking about your childhood encephalitis and being a very, very sick child. That's got to figure into this. It's got to figure into Judith and Hamnet. And you're so deep in what the world looks like as a sick child, which is totally different from what it looks like as a sick adult.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I wasn't really thinking about myself particularly when I think about it, but I know, I think writing about the fever, I'm sure, actually was that. I do think as anyone who's been through a severe illness will know that, going through that is a bit like you're completely recast. It's like walking through a fire. You're melted down and you're poured into this whole other mold, and life is never the same again. You come back from the brink a completely different person, I think. And any sort of serious illness or life-threatening event, it's going to take up residence inside you. You won't ever be the same again. You're much wiser and much sadder. So I think it's true, and it's funny. Someone asked me recently, they said, if you could go back in time and not have your childhood illness, would you do that if you were given this kind of supernatural? I thought, God, I'd never thought. And I thought, actually, I wouldn't. Of course I wouldn't. Because, why would you ever want to cancel out any particular experience that teaches you so much, And I think, any kind of form of illness that you become, it sort of increases your powers of empathy and perception in a way. I don't know. And also I became a reader during that time, when I was lying in bed. That was when that's all I did actually for about 2 years. So it could be worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And also having a child who has had illness. I mean, all of those two things that at every point in Hamnet, you come at everything from both sides. You know, the child looking out, the omniscience is beautiful in this book, but the child looking out as a sick child, as a child wanting help, as a child fearful, and then also as the parent wanting help, as the parent fearful, and then very, very different emotions. And you just kind of keep kaleidoscoping them off. Okay, so this is it, because they're going to make us get off. Are you crazy sick of talking about Shakespeare? This book has been such a success, like an international success. And now the damn paperback is coming out and you have to do it again.
No, as my children will tell you that I'm never sick of talking about Shakespeare. When I was writing this book, and even to this day, I'm limited to only one Tudor fact a day. And I'm allowed to say one thing at dinner time, and then that's it. I'm not allowed any more. So actually, this is where I can, give full rein to all my Tudor facts. So no, it's great. I'm fine. I'm happy to talk about it till the cows come home.
Good. I'm so glad. I really hope that when the world is a world we can recognize more easily, you will come and visit us. If you can, we would so love to see you. And if not, I will come and visit you, because
Please do.
I'm such a huge fan. I just adore your work. And
well, you know what? Likewise, I have to say it's completely mutual. So I think we should definitely get together and we can just sing each other's praises over a dinner.
We can do this forever. And I also want to say to everyone out there, despite our freezing, thank you very much for sticking with us. And here's what I have to tell you. You have to buy the book. Now, of course, this is paperback. Maybe you've already read Hamnet. That's fine. Then you buy I Am, or any of Maggie's other amazing novels, and I love them all. You can pick, but this is how we stay in business. So we do these Zoom things when they're in person and the author's there. Sometimes you feel a little guilty and you feel like, oh, I really should get a book and stand in the line. This is the honor system. This is like the vegetable stand that's unattended on a Tuesday morning, and you take the tomato and you put your dollar in the little can. That's what you've got to do. This is the honor system. You must go and buy a book now. All right, that's it. It's my goal in life to guilt everybody into buying a book, because we all have dogs. We have to buy the kibble. That's how this happens. Hamnet, loved it. Maggie, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Anne. It was really, really lovely. And I hope we can do it in person soon.
I hope so too. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye.